Welcome to The Explainer. I am so excited to have you here today because we're tackling a topic that literally affects every single one of us every single day. We're looking at how our split-second judgments about other people's appearances lead to massive and often totally hidden societal damage that just fractures our communities. We think we're just making a harmless guess, right? But the ripple effects are staggering. Okay, let's dive into this. I mean, it's the oldest cliche in the book, but I want you to answer this honestly for a second. Have you ever looked at someone's shoes or maybe the state of their coats and just instantly made an assumption about their bank account or their intelligence? We all do it. I've absolutely done it. Our brains are basically hardwired to categorize things quickly, but here's the harsh reality. Those inherent biases are almost always wrong, and acting on them comes with a hefty price tag. So, the reality we are unpacking today is simple, but man, is it devastating. While snap judgments might feel like a totally natural human reflex, the hidden costs of these assumptions are incredibly damaging. We aren't just talking about a few hurt feelings here. We're talking about tangible economic losses, deep personal trauma, and a really fractured society where trust just completely starts to evaporate. Section 1. Costly business assumptions, when bias hurts the bottom line. Let's actually explore how businesses and professionals lose out big time when they let outward appearances dictate how they treat people. Okay, when I was reading the source material, this contrast completely blew my mind. A medical professional shared this crazy story about a pregnant patient who rushed into the hospital. She was barefoot, wearing torn clothes, literally covered in garden soil, and her husband was this smaller guy bundled up in heavy wool in the dead of July, just kind of mumbling to himself. The doctors instantly assumed they were dealing with a homeless, uneducated couple. They completely dismissed her from participating in her own medical care, essentially talking down to her like a child. Well, guess what? It turns out she was the visiting Mars chair of the local university's math department. She had literally just been gardening when her water broke. And her husband, he was a brilliant African math scholar who was calming his nerves by solving complex quadratic equations in his head. Needless to say, the doctors had to eat some serious crow. Right, and here's another one that really caught me off guard. There was a man known to everyone around his town as just a scrubby construction worker. He always wore dirty work clothes, dusty boots, seemed like a guy just scraping by on daily manual labor. But the reality? He was a multi-millionaire real estate investor who personally owned several of the large apartment complexes in the area. He just genuinely enjoyed doing the hard, hands-on work himself. If you judged him by the dirt on his shirt, you would absolutely never know you were standing next to a massive financial powerhouse. We see this exact same thing play out in high-end retail, too. Just imagine a young woman walking into an exclusive luxury car dealership wearing completely plain, casual, everyday clothes. One of the senior sales employees took one look at her and spent the entire morning subtly insulting her, assuming she couldn't even afford a cup of coffee, let alone a vehicle. As it turned out, her name was Lily Thomas, and she had just sold her tech app to Microsoft for 8 figures. Because of one superficial judgment, that employee lost out on a massive, life-changing commission for a brand new Porsche and, ended up being demoted. So these aren't just, awkward, isolated social interactions. They are wildly expensive mistakes. It results in lost commissions on luxury cars and designer bags. It leads to the dangerous dismissal of patients in medical settings, which severely compromises care. We even saw a documented case where bank employees were outright fired for humiliating a humble customer trying to deposit her life savings. And this brilliantly illustrates that bias literally hurts the bottom line. Section 2. The human toll, isolation, and past prejudice. We're shifting gears now from financial losses to the deep emotional and psychological damage caused by these snap judgments. Listen to the sheer weight of this quote from the sources. Quote, "I'm a 6'8", 260-pound black man, a university student studying medieval and early modern history. I really hate people crossing over the road to not be near me." This student shares how crushing it is to walk down the street and just watch people cross the road out of fear, or see mothers actively pull their children closer. He constantly has to overcompensate, trying to make himself appear safe and approachable just to offset people's completely unfounded, superficial fears. I mean, just imagine the daily psychological weight of having to manage everyone else's prejudice. And then there's this incredibly powerful moment. A barista confessed to silently fuming at 2 customers who walked up to the counter just tapping away on their phones. She assumed they were unbelievably rude, ignoring her to look at their screens. But when they handed her the phone, it was a notepad app that read, "Hi, we're deaf mute. Could we please have 2 grande coffees with room for milk?" The barista was hit with a massive wave of guilt. When we project hostility onto a situation based purely on surface-level assumptions, that guilt is heavy. And as these individual moments pile up, the societal impact becomes truly devastating. It isolates individuals from their communities. It actively harms kids. One of our sources told the heartbreaking story of a sweet third grader named Candy, who was bullied so relentlessly just for having red hair that she completely dropped out of school. And when we model this behavior, we just pass learned prejudices down to the next generation. It denies people basic human dignity. Think of Yasmina, a young woman who brought legitimate savings from selling cans to a bank, only to be cruelly profiled, laughed at, and called a thief, simply because her clothes were humble. This is the heavy cost we pay as a society. It creates a culture of distrust, it fractures communities, and it teaches our kids that their worth is tied entirely to how they look. It's just a massive societal failure. Section 3. When looks deceive, the deception of success. Now we're going to completely flip the script. Because it's not just judging people negatively that causes harm. Judging people positively, based only on wealthy appearances, leads to its own kind of devastating societal fallout. We've all been heavily conditioned, haven't we, to equate wealth with morality and competence. But flashy cars, Rolex watches, and sprawling 6,000-square-foot homes absolutely do not equal trustworthiness. In fact, the appearance of immense wealth is frequently weaponized by bad actors to intentionally drop our guard and mask criminal behavior. Just look at this comparison. I could hardly believe this one when I read it. From the outside, this man was the absolute picture of the American dream. He was a highly respected businessman, a regular churchgoer, had a beautiful family, and lived on a multi-million-dollar property with a massive pool. Everyone in town trusted him implicitly, but behind closed doors, he was secretly laundering massive amounts of money, eventually getting convicted, facing 3 years in federal prison, and a $10 million fine. His respectable, wealthy appearance was literally the absolute perfect camouflage. And then, oh man, we have the heartbreaking story of a guy named Charlie who reconnected with an old high school friend known as Jake the Snake. Jake was suddenly boasting a private chef, luxury art, a brand new Rolex, and a driveway just full of exotic sports cars. Blinded by this incredible illusion of extreme wealth, Charlie handed over his entire $25,000 life savings, fully believing he was investing in a legitimate, booming business. But Jake was just running a devastating Ponzi scheme, literally stealing from his own friends to fund his extravagant lifestyle. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when you actually break down the mechanics of a Ponzi scheme, like the economics professor in our sources did, you realize there is no real business underneath it. It relies entirely on bringing in new investors to pay off the early ones. So how do they trick incredibly smart people? By flaunting extreme outward wealth. The cars, the watches, the houses, they are carefully curated props used to build a false sense of trust. When we trust the outfit instead of the actions, we get scammed, and communities lose millions. Section 4. Breaking the cycle. Actions over outfits. So, how do we fix this? How do we actually stop falling into the trap of our own biases, whether we're underestimating a genius in dirty clothes or overestimating a scammer in a tailored suit? We really have to anchor ourselves to something much deeper. This quote from the source material hits the nail on the head. A person's true character is defined by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them in return. This was beautifully highlighted in a story about an older woman who was mocked by others for sharing her lunch with a stray dog. But her empathy and pure intentions ultimately allowed her to save a young man from complete financial ruin. Character is revealed in actions, folks, not accessories. So the crucial point is that we absolutely must actively redefine our standards. We have to consciously give the out-of-the-ordinary person a chance. We must train ourselves to reject the urge to jump to conclusions based on clothing or outward appearance. We need to remember that anyone can be a criminal, regardless of how perfectly manicured their lawn is. And above all, we must value empathy, kindness, and courtesy far above any perceived social status. That is how we rebuild trust in our communities. I want to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer today. Look at the people you interact with. The barista, the person in the waiting room, your coworker, the stranger crossing the street. Look past the cover of the book. Who are you underestimating today? Thank you so much for joining me, and I challenge you to look a little deeper this week.